And we are live on all channels. All right, so just to give you guys a little introduction before we get started, I am about 3 minutes early. Don't worry, we're not going to start until 6 o'clock. Just want to let everyone know what's kind of going on here. We're live on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. So you're going to see me bobbing my head around a little bit. All right. Because the idea here is I am going to be talking about something I wanted to talk about, but I want to leave a lot of the time for questions and answers and also critiques to my position on the supernatural, UFOs, aliens, etc. I want to leave some space for people who disagree with what I'm saying, and give them opportunity to propose a challenge, a rebuttal to what I'm about to say, because there's so many people who would categorize all supernatural events into just a few categories. Some people will say something like it's angels and demons. Other people will say it's all aliens. Other people will say it's essentially cryptozoology. Hey, how you doing? Better days. What's up? I propose that it's even stranger, that we're dealing with a dynamic supernatural ecosystem that lives beyond the visible light spectrum. And there's clues to this being the truth throughout history. Mythological beliefs, religious beliefs, historical accounts, and a lot of the new science and like research, journalistic investigation that goes into the contactee experience, UFOs, Bigfoot, and the connection between Bigfoot and UFOs, balls of light, poltergeist, you name it. There seems to be this intricate framework where all those things connect when you start looking at the research, for instance, of David Paulides, Jacque Vallee, and John Keel. And a lot of what I'm about to say is based on their work. Some of what I'm about to say is my own anecdotal experiences. I've had many of the experiences that were discussed in those books, as well as many that you've heard 100, 1,000 times. This similar same story: a visitation at night, loss of memory, an absolute change in the structure of your beliefs after you come in contact with one of these supernatural events, and et cetera, et cetera. And so that's what we're going to be discussing is a couple of these ideas. And I've coined the whole thing, the whole problem. By the way, I think this may be the most important problem right now, especially right now, with all the insanity, the fact that we can't seem to make any sense of the world at all. Besides there being probably 1,000 psyops by clandestine organizations, I think even more important is actually this supernatural issue with the aliens, with the ghosts, with the demons and the angels. I think we're dealing with a superstructure that appears to be deceptive, extremely powerful in the etheric world, but not in the physical one. A deep desire to influence the decisions we make and the physical moves we engage in, the technologies we go into, the buildings that we build. There seems to be a heavy desire to influence those outcomes, which leads me to believe that whatever these things are benefit from certain outcomes that we create when they woo us and seduce us and deceive us, and influence us in different ways through means of supernatural events, through means of religious institutional structures, and many other ways. Okay, just random visitations. It's kind of like that one situation that happened in a country in Africa. I think it might have been Kenya, where a bunch of no South Africa, I think it was, and all the kids were visited by literal little gray men with big black eyes who told them that our technology was too advanced and that it might destroy the world and we need to take care of the environment. And you see those narratives now in our mainstream, cabalistic people who go to Davos and the World Economic Forum about the environment, the environment, the environment. And you start to wonder if some of these things are connected. That's another thing we're going to get into is some of this supernatural stuff actually just the government taking advantage of magic tricks on a superstitious people. We all have the ability. Um, we all have the ability to become superstitious, and we're all superstitious in some way. Whether it's we won't walk on a crack or under a ladder, or we believe in a grand mythos that has absolutely no sense making in the real world, but because we've been embedded in a religion or a philosophy or a group of people, It's as real as, the sun coming up in the morning. And so I've coined the whole thing the invisible elephant in the room, because it truly is the invisible elephant in the room, in the sense that it's the biggest thing that nobody's talking about. Science won't touch it for whatever reason. It's not because they don't think it's reasonable. Any scientist who's not out of their mind will look at all the information and the data and know that at least something is happening that is beyond individual hallucinations. Any scientist worth their salt can't look at all the stacks and stacks and stacks of data and evidence and say that there is no supernatural phenomenon occurring here, and that there is no supernatural conspiracy. People like John Keel and Jacque Vallee and David Paulides, skeptical folks, very skeptical people, have looked over all this information and decided there is something very strange here. Whatever it is, it's intelligent, it's deceptive, it's dangerous, and it may connect every single strange thing that we can't explain. Like with David Paulides, it's Bigfoot, UFO, alien, clandestine organizations. With Jacque Vallee, it's some of the same things, but these grander overarching conspiracies of a kind of a matrix control system, a sort of Agent Smith that lives in the supernatural world that can take on many forms, along with our government and clandestine organizations, essentially performing magic tricks with high technology that's way ahead of the curve, that's way outside of popular science and Science magazine, that we'd have no reason to be able to even figure out how it would work by putting pieces of metal together and running electricity through it. We look at it and we'd be like, and that's just the case. That's true. 20 years before the Black Hawk stealth, the F-117, 20 years before it was released to the public, they were flying it over California and using its new jamming systems and jamming government radars. One particular individual in the military got a good look at it, was able to describe it and draw it. He was brought in, and his higher ups interrogated him or questioned him. Says, "What did you see?" The guy drew the thing out. It looked like the F-117. He described it, et cetera, et cetera. Now this may have been on radar, or it might have been him seeing it, like being able to make visual. When they were done, they told him never say any of this to anyone, and sent him to Alaska to do a bid up there. You keep him out of the way. And so we know that at the very least, the government's 20 years ahead of us. They're developing planes that you won't see for 20 years. Just try to think about that. Think about the F-35. It's insane. It's magic. Think about that in the year 2000. Try to imagine that plane in the year 2000, only in science fiction movies. So we have to understand that whatever we're seeing, whatever they're showing us, they have an aircraft that's at least 20 years more advanced than the F-35, which would mean it's probably 2 cycles, so a 9th generation aircraft. Absolutely, and yeah, exactly. And it's probably more like 100 years. At the very minimum, we're dealing with 20 years. Therefore, some of these UFOs absolutely have to be the government testing their planes, for instance. So let's get into like the TR-3B. Like, we're still waiting for that one to come out. The TR-3B, for anyone who doesn't know what the TR-3B is, it's the flying triangle. It's the big black triangle with the light in the middle and the lights on the side, and everyone's like, UFO, UFO, UFO. That's an Air Force aircraft that was inspired by the Nazi research into mercury centrifuges. When you spin, so here's something interesting. More people are discovering that this is the truth. So what the Nazis figured out with their Nazi bell, Die Glock. So there's this octagon structure in Germany. It kind of looks like, some kind of almost like a Greco-Roman structure. It's an octagon, and it's got 8 pillars. It looks like a cage. It was used as a cage for the Nazi bell, which was the bell-shaped craft they were working on. How the Nazi bell worked was they ran mercury, the liquid metal, in a centrifuge by electrifying it. When it would spin, this is interesting, and this all makes sense because I'm going to explain it, and you're going to be like, oh yeah, that's basic science. The reason they would use mercury is because it would be easier to use mercury than trying to spin, a piece of lead on a string. What they were trying to create was a very powerful centrifugal force outward. When the Nazis discovered that when you do that, when you push the force outward, you alleviate the force downward from gravity. And the Nazis figured out how to reduce the gravitational pull on an object by 87%, right? And that's what they use for the TR3B. And that's why the TR3B looks like it floats. It doesn't have to go fast because you've already reduced the gravitational pull by 87%. So essentially you reduce the weight by 87%, meaning they could probably almost run those things in the sky on large fans. You understand? So that's an aircraft that they haven't released yet, but they very much have it. It's the TR3B by the Air Force. So let's really start off. By the way, I'm going to be taking questions. I'm going to put my glasses on for now. I don't like the reflection that it puts on the light, obviously, so we won't do it all the time, but I need to eat more carrots so I can get my sharp eyesight. So what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be talking about these particular ideas, but I'm going to be bouncing around to check the questions on all three of the platforms. Okay? So I'll go into here, then I'll check. I'll go into here and check. And I know I'm not on live a lot as much as I used to be. So people might have some doorknob questions, some aching questions they want to ask outside of the UFO phenomenon. That's fine. Feel free to do that toward the end. We'll do about an hour of this, and then I'll spend maybe 15, 30 minutes, depending on how I feel. And just ask some random questions, but try to save those ones to the end. And if you can find a way to kind of like craft your question in a way that relates to what we're doing, you can even do that. Okay. So let's start off. I want to talk about a question somebody asked me on TikTok today. I didn't get a chance to answer or to do a video, but I figured it would be a great way to open up here. I don't think the Galactic Federation is real. Spoiler alert, but you probably already knew that about me, right? Because, I don't believe in any of these mythos stories unless they've got some meat, unless they've got meat and potatoes attached to them. They've got substance. They don't have substance and they don't empower us, then I call BS usually. So I call BS on the Galactic Federation. Why? Here's some very interesting details about the UFO phenomenon over the course of history you may have not known, but once I tell you, you will have no choice to make besides disbanding the idea of the Galactic Federation. It won't be able to exist simultaneously with the information I'm about to give you. It almost completely disproves the Galactic Federation, at least for what they state that they are, okay? Pay very close attention to this, but this is so important. From about the Middle Ages to the 1800s, we were having UFO sightings, except they weren't spacecraft, okay? They were literal flying ships, like the ones that should be in the ocean. Giant wooden ships floating in the sky. Not one time was this told. This story was told over and over again. Entire communities saw these things. People in high standing in their communities, police officers, you name it, okay? Here's one thing that, some skeptics are going to try to say, and it's totally ridiculous. There is no way that common people, royalty, police officers, politicians, everyone from every walk of life and every area, over the course of hundreds, if not thousands of years, there is no way that all those people could coordinate a conspiracy theory to get everyone to believe that something strange was happening here. It's impossible. Which means that these sightings, at the very least, these people saw what they saw. They saw flying ships, sometimes multiple people at the same time. So it wasn't individual hallucination either. The only thing you could say skeptically about it is it was a mass hallucination. Okay, sure. But what the heck is a mass hallucination? Something we should investigate. So from the medieval age to about the 1800s, we saw flying ships. The occupants would swim down in the air. Okay, so like another really interesting thing we're going to get into is the Martians. This is where it gets really strange, but we'll jump to that in the next part. So there was people swimming through the air because what would happen is sometimes the anchor would be dragging. Thank you for the gifts, folks. Thank you for the gifts. Sometimes the anchor would be dragging off of this flying ship and it would get caught on something. So a person in the ship would swim down in the air and release the anchor. Sometimes they spoke in English. Sometimes they spoke in a language that didn't make any sense to anybody. Sometimes, I shouldn't say English, but I speak English. But wherever they were, the people spoke fluently the language where they were, or they spoke some weird babbling language that no one understood. But when they talked to the people, they usually used the language that people spoke in. Sometimes they'd use the babble, but most of the time when they were using the other language, they were talking amongst each other. So we have flying ships. Now, when these people would talk to us human beings, we would ask them where they were from. And what would they say? They'd say they were from Magonia, which was kind of like a castle in the sky or a city that was built on a high mountain that we couldn't get to. Okay? From about the 1800s, mid 1800s to the very early 1900s, we saw flying airships, like blimps, kind of like blimps, but with some kind of advanced, almost steampunk technology. Those people would have another strange story about where they're from, or they'd say, oh, we're just around that or that way, or they'll say, oh, we're from everywhere. Okay. Now, before the flying ships, there was also other stories, except these were fairies now. And the fairies lived in a magical land, just a little farther than we could ever get to. Now we move into closer to the mid 1900s, and we start getting the ships. But at the same time, human beings are starting to understand how to fly metal objects in the sky. Just so happens that we also start seeing more advanced versions of them in the sky. Funny, right? Kind of a weird coincidence. So sometimes the occupants would talk to the people then. And what would the occupants say then? That they were Martians and Venusians, people from Mars and Venus. Now that we've scaled every mountain, right? We know there's no palaces in the sky. All of a sudden, they change their story to be from somewhere, again, we cannot get to, and we can't prove that they're there. Okay? Do you see a trend? Because it gets stranger. Then we get past the 1950s, okay? Or into the 1950s and later on. The ships become even more insanely advanced, like Star Trek, Star Wars level, right? As we're imagining these stories and telling these stories and making these movies. So we ask the people again, where are they from? They've changed their form a little bit. Now they're from Zeta Reticuli, Pleiades, Draconis, and other places, and they're part of a galactic federation. Let me ask you a serious question. Where did the Magonians go? Where did the Martians go? Where did the Venusians go? Where did the fairy people go? Like, because you think if all these things are real every time, because what people are doing right now with the Galactic Federation is taking seriously what they're saying, the same way if someone took seriously the people when they said they were Martians. The same as when people said they were from Magonia. They're doing the exact same thing. They're taking their word for it, right? Just assuming that they won't lie to them. But we look back at people who think, oh, they're from Magonia, the giant palace in the sky. We think that's ridiculous. In 20, 30 years, we're going to look back at the people saying Galactic Federation and say that was ridiculous, right? They don't know it yet. But that's exactly what's going to happen. Why? Because they've lied every other time. They've lied every other time, and they haven't talked about the lie. Or, even more ridiculous of a conclusion, the Magonians left right when the Martians showed up, and the Martians left right when the Pleiadians showed up. Like they're like, I don't know, they have to they've got a timeshare on Earth, right? An even more ridiculous conclusion. The most obvious one is they're lying. Whatever these things are, they're lying, and they're telling a different story, constantly kind of shifting the focus of humans in the way they think. There's a deceptive element. There's an influential element where it seems like they're trying to get us to do certain things. There are so many stories. Like Rene Descartes was visited by an angel. The night after his army, he was a soldier in the army, put down an alchemical rebellion. It was like a Christian-based army that put down an alchemical rebellion. He goes to sleep, has a dream, an angel visits him and says, the world will be conquered with measure and number, which inspired the scientific revolution and the scientific method. How's that for influencing mankind? Changed everything. And it was an angel that inspired the use of science, which is kind of an antithesis to religion in the first place. It's a very strange, ironic, contradictory thing, but it actually happened. And that was Rene Descartes. Okay? That's a random person that you never met before, never heard of. So then Once we get past Pleiadians and all this, what's the talk now, folks? What's the talk now? It's interdimensional beings. Why? Because our radiographs and electromagnetic measurements and all this can and radio receivers can see if anything intelligent is happening in the Pleiades and Zeta Reticula. So we can't see it, we can't visually confirm it, but we have the technology and tools to be able to figure out if there's anything intelligent on those planets. So they had to switch the story again. Since we can reach the far edges of the galaxy with our tools, they now have to say that they're from a place that we can't even imagine and begin to enter into. The story just keeps on changing. And this is why I think it's quite obvious that the Galactic Federation is silly. They never do anything. They never make good on any of the promises that they say they're going to do, et cetera, et cetera. And all of the characteristics of these phenomenons are the skin changes, the costume changes. It's kind of like Passport to Magonia. The cover of the book Passport to Magonia by Jacque Vallee shows a green alien switching masks. It's a Joker. It's a beautiful woman with blonde hair. It's a clown. It's this. It's that. Okay, and that the point Jacque's trying to make is that there's something behind all this, but it's able to completely change its appearance, tell you a crazy story. And obviously, the narrative is protecting the actual narrative for them, what they're really doing, which appears to be controlling and influencing what we do as human beings. And it always seems to be a little destabilizing, which brings me back to the idea of the Tower of Babel. Because back then, our technology had gotten too advanced and it was sabotaged by a god. These things often refer to themselves as gods, and they just happen to be telling us that our technology is too advanced. It's an interesting detail, and there's something about them not liking when we get too advanced. It's sort of giving us warnings, and then doing a little okie dokie on us and getting us to change what we do in our society, always subverting whatever we strongly believe in, always subverting the way we're advancing as human beings when we decide to advance in our own way and not by the influence of whatever these things are. I want people to really think really outside the box because this really attaches to the idea I propose, maybe not on here, but I've been working on a theory called the field of dreams, or the dream field theory. Right? We have a quantum field and we have a morphogenetic field. Right, the quantum field essentially, like, you know, to really put it in super layman terms and do it kind of a disservice, but it's important to simplify things so we don't go into quantum field theory. The quantum is sort of like it's a mapping of the space-time field, and I don't even believe time's not a dimension, but there's too much to talk about there. But it's basically analyzing the fundamental structure and lattice of what manifests reality in space and time. Okay, but time's not real. Time's just an illusion because we see things move and we say, oh, time passed. Time is only a mathematical dimension on a piece of paper. It's not a real dimension. It's just something we use to do because the math works, because if the map is self-containing. The 3 dimensions work because we did that, not because there's actually 3 dimensions. There's not 3 dimensions. It's just they're mathematical dimensions on a piece of paper, but that's for another time. So the quantum deals essentially with the finest pieces of our physical reality. Okay, but also, and when I say physical, I don't just mean the physical, right? Because the electromagnetic is part of that physical reality. The morphogenetic field deals with the resonance of those objects, the resonance of the physicality of our reality. But there's still a missing piece. And the missing piece has terrorized quantum physicists for 40 to 50 years or more. It's the observer effect. It's the Schrodinger equation. It's this idea that nothing is quite where it is or what it's supposed to be until it's observed, which leads me to believe that there's a third field. And that field is the field of the mind, the field of the observer, the field of dreams, which would actually lend credence to the idea of the simulation theory. But again, we're not in a simulation. That's a word we're using because of the cultural context that we live in, because we're building simulations in computers. Because before computers, no one called it a simulation. People called it the dream. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream, merrily, 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 merrily. Life is but a dream. That's what that's about. It's about reminding you, hey, relax. It's not as serious and real as you think it is. It's still important, but like chill, you know? So before the simulation, they called it a dream. So the reason I'm saying all this is because this supernatural element, which seems to have a sort of jester quality, but also has been helpful to some people. Some people have gotten wonderful information from whatever this phenomenon is. Some people have gotten gold, like literal, like gold that was not like, it wasn't printed or minted by any human being. Just like it was like strange gold, but still gold from dwarves that if you did them a favor, they give you gold. These are real stories. These aren't just folklore. Like people would get bags of gold from people who were little guys with big black beards. This is real stories. These aren't just fairy tales. These really happen. These are real accounts. So yeah, the lead into gold, they can actually do it, whatever these things are. And then we have to get, of course, into the clockwork machine elves that Terence McKenna talks about and Joe Rogan talks about. That when you take enough DMT, you meet these things that can speak physicality with word. They speak and create hyperdimensional objects and try to teach you how to do it. So I know I'm saying a lot of different things, and it seems like I'm going tangential, but it's all going to make sense now. So we have this strange supernatural phenomenons, which appears to be a sort of ecosystem. Jinn, the jinn, demons, aliens, ghosts, poltergeist, Bigfoot, UFOs, orbs of light, they are all part of a superstructure ecosystem. The same way tigers and mosquitoes and blades of grass and dirt and soil and rivers and microorganisms and parakeets are part of an ecosystem we understand now. Because we're living in that physical world. What we're dealing with on this other edge is a supernatural ecosystem that's just as diverse, if not more diverse. Okay, so we have that. Then we have the potentiality that there is a third field. Now, scientists aren't even confirming the morphogenetic field yet. Hopefully they will soon so we can get to the third field. So the potential for a third field that influences reality based on the way we think. Okay? And then we have this idea that we're living in the dream world. Now, here's what's interesting. There's two ways to look at this. Whatever this is sentient, intelligent, and has its own agency, meaning it makes its own choices, whatever these supernatural things are, or manifested from our minds. They are figments of our imagination which come to life through engagement of the field of dreams, which is our consciousness, affecting the morphogenetic field, which resonates and affects the quantum field, and sometimes makes these things actually come to exist. Or it's a mixture of both of those things. Or we can create these tulpas, these egregores, these golems. Everyone knows one of those. A thought form. God spoke the word and the word became flesh, and God made us in his image, so we are God's too, so we can also speak word in the flesh, which is what the elves are teaching people in the DMT experience. We can create those things and then they can gain their own agency. Okay? And the more people that pray and believe in them, the stronger they get and the more affect they actually have in the world. And I think this is just scratching the surface of what we're dealing with. But what's most important, going back to the invisible elephant in the room, is that they have, like I said, a gesture quality. They kind of like, they try to push our limits a little bit. They're a reminder of what this place actually is. That's why they're the invisible elephant in the room. Because the elephant in the room is the cosmic terror of understanding what we're actually doing here. That none of this is actually really real, right? That this is a standing waveform. that doesn't, the only reason it doesn't collapse is because we will it to continue. Those UFOs and the aliens and all that are sort of a layer of they're like the way the equation doesn't balance at the end and kicks back something to us, because we can't balance the equation. Because if you balance the equation, there'd be no, it would all end. It would be neutralized. So they're sort of like a little, they're the key to perpetuating the illusion, but also reminding us that it is an illusion. There's something wrapped up in there. Now, some of these things seem to be malicious, so I wouldn't categorize all these things in there. But there's a wink. It's God winking type of thing. In fact, if you've ever done the memento mori exercise, where you sit in front of a mirror, all your lights out in the house, and you light a candle, and you sit there for a while, eventually your reflection starts to do weird shit that you can't explain, as if you take in a heavy dose of LSD. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, I had my reflection literally winked at me, but it did it so like overtly, like it was saying like, this is God winking at you, or this is the dream winking back at you. Your consciousness is projected on all things, and now it's looking back at you. You know, you get into a group of people and you tell a scary story about a spooky creature, a bat creature, and then, you know, one of your friends or maybe a couple of your friends actually see it, or you hear rumbling in the trees that you shouldn't be hearing. We can manifest these things as well. I know that was a lot, and I want to try to get all these things out. I know we're riffing a little bit, and there's ways to connect these things more so they make more cohesive sense, but I wanted to kind of blurt all that out so that people could start thinking about these new ideas a little bit, and I'll start to seeing if there's any questions that anybody has. Yeah, I do check the Insta Live, so I'll be able to answer some questions here. So we'll try to go in order. Everywhere I'll try to slide back up a little bit. I might miss some, but I'll try to start from the beginning, so the early bird gets the worm, right? All right, so let's start here. Just like when you decrease pressure on the center point, pull force inverted. Question: I definitely believe negative aliens come from the underworld, mountains, oceans, but do you have any knowledge of benevolent beings that might occupy lands beyond the ice wall? Well, so there, in order to take that position, you have to assume a bunch of things to be true, which we're not sure are true, right? Now, I get a lot of flack. People say I'm a flat earther, for instance, right? So I'm not a flat earther, but I'm also not a globe earther. I'm not an anything earther, right? I just know that the scientists lie to us a lot now, all the official scientists, and those are the ones propping up this globe earth theory and acting like we should just believe it when there's really not a lot of evidence for us regular people who haven't flown out to space to believe it. Like almost every single picture we've been shown of space is a CG rendition. That's strange. If you look at the pictures that they've taken of Earth over the course of 40 to 50 years, it's constantly changing. It's ridiculous. I mean, they put their astronauts on the ISS on strings to simulate that they're floating in 0G. You wouldn't have to do all those things unless you were lying about something. So I do think they're lying. I don't know what they're lying about exactly, but they're lying. That's pretty obvious, right? With the alien thing, I'm not even nearly convinced that that there is any aliens at all. What if this is literally a dream? Really think about that. What if the area that we occupy on Earth is a literal dream and nothing is actually real? And whatever we convince ourselves is real is what becomes real. So therefore, aliens only exist because we think about them existing. And the more we think about UFOs and aliens, the more we see them. But they're not real because we've just manifested their presence in our reality from the dream stuff that we use our consciousness to collapse into form. What if that's what it is, right? So no, I don't think I think there's something down underneath, right? Because there's so many stories from the natives that talk about a being, they call them the ant people. I think it's strange that ants, right? Like if you thought about a gray alien, it kind of looks a lot like an ant standing up, or like a bipedal ant, right? Without the six, you know what I mean? So I think there's something there. I just don't know exactly what it is. And the ant people allegedly helped the Hopi survive the last apocalypse. So there might be something there, right? But again, this still could be the superstructure manifesting itself as a being. And I don't think there's good and bad aliens. Remember this too. Like whenever we're dealing with these ideas of like duality, like this idea of good and evil, think about people. You can't categorize people into two, good and evil. We're a mixed bag. Some people are good some of the time. Some people are evil in other times. Some people are good in a lot of ways, but they can't seem to be decent in other ways. Some people are evil because they were traumatized when they were kids. Some people are good because they're afraid to be bad. It's very dynamic. And so I think that we've been fed this idea of a battle of good and evil between angels and demons, a battle of good and evil between Galactic Federation houses, right, or species. But it's you could tell that's how you could tell by that it's a false mythology, because it's a projection of low resolution storytelling, right? Because if we were to tell a really good story about human beings, we wouldn't just have good people and bad people, because that story would suck, because it wouldn't be real. Our heroes are often flawed. Our villains are often reasonable and propose scary ideas that actually make sense. But the decisions they make to get to solidify the ideas are what we come against. It's like the Joker in the Dark Knight. A lot of what he said was extremely convincing. The way he went about trying to prove his point was the terrible part. Same thing with Thanos. A lot of what Thanos was saying made sense. It's just the decision to wipe out half of the population of the universe is where people were like, we got to put a foot down there. But like I said, villains aren't these 100% evil villain will be kind of boring, right? And 100% good. That's why Superman failed as a comic in the beginning. It's because Superman was perfect. He was boring. There was nothing to redeem him. But the reason it's boring is because it's not realistic. What's realistic is we're flawed human beings, and sometimes we do great things despite our limitations. So when we're telling stories about angels and demons and a galactic federation with one side that likes human beings and one side that doesn't, on the face of it, it's just low resolution storytelling. And a lot of these stories come from these sort of cultish organizations that were inspired during the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, at the same time that they were running Operation Mind F. I don't know which one I don't know if I can say the F word. I would, but I don't know which ones might stop my live. Operation Mind Freak. And at the same time, Charlie Manson had a CIA handler before he went and lost his mind and did what he did. And all these other things that we won't get into too much detail. But what I'm saying is there was operations to screw with us fundamentally at very deep levels of our philosophy and our religion and our sense of self. And then all these crazy mythologies came out, and they were getting people to believe in these new gods or believe that they're superior because they're indigo children or they're star seeds or whatever it is. And all of it was just separating people more and more. So, like I said, when you look on the face of it, to answer your question, when you look on the face of these ideas of the good and evil, it's low resolution storytelling, which came from a human being who made up a story. Because if not, it would have been more dynamic. And all of the beings wouldn't be humanoid. They wouldn't all be primate bipedals, right? Some of them would walk on four legs. Some of them would float. They all walk like us. That's because it's a projection. Whether they're projecting an idea to us that will make more sense, or we're projecting an idea we would have about an alien in these supernatural events. You feel me? There would be more. It would be richer. It would feel more real. So anytime you're hearing one of these stories, whether it's from a religion or the New Age, dissect it and be like, okay, how does this fit into the real world beyond the narrative story that I'm hearing right now? Let me take it past a little imagination thing I'm doing in my head and try to apply it to the world and see if it would stick. If all the other characteristics of my reality, it would explain things better. The Galactic Federation doesn't. Because imagine we're an advanced race and we go visit some other planet and we just sit around visiting them and collecting soil samples for 50 years, right? And abducting people and doing weird shit to them, and then telling them that we're from this, and there's a policy and there's bureaucracy and we really can't get through it. So like this alien has to be able to do this to you for a while, but we're gonna swoop in soon. And you just keep hearing that story for decades. It doesn't click with reality once you apply it, right? It doesn't click because like there's going to be two things that are going to happen. For instance, if we were spacefaring and we see a planet, we're either going to like, you know, kind of try to help, like if we evolve the neocortex, you know, in time when we get out there, whatever space is. I know people are saying the space isn't real. I don't know. Let's say spacefaring is real. We're either going to develop the neocortex enough to be able to see a planet and be like, oh, there's resources there that we should get. And we'd be like, well, we'll take some, but we'll make sure we don't screw up the ecosystem or the evolving species, the apex species that seems to be sentient. We'll collect what we need. Maybe we'll even barter a deal if we can communicate with them, and we'll be on our way. Or we're not going to develop the neocortex enough, and we'll just be, you know, cosmic colonizers, right? It's not going to be some weird shit, like some weird space opera that these people are going to have to deal with us. It's weird. It doesn't make any sense. Here's another one. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of stories, maybe more, of people saying that the reason that the Galactic Federation doesn't come down is because they're afraid that we'll use our nukes. It's so stupid. If you can travel here in super advanced spaceships from light years away, light years, we haven't even figured out how to do that in our imagination yet. And these beings have figured that out. You're telling me they can't just neutralize every nuke inside of the silo before they even get to the surface of the Earth? BS. A lot of these stories they tell they're just telling a story that's convincing enough to the person hearing the story. Right? But when we start actually applying, okay, if they can travel light speed or travel for light years and it's not hard for them, or they can slip between dimensions, and they're afraid of our conventional nuclear warheads, which they made thousands of years ago, and developed technologies that completely made it a nuclear weapon an antique. Come on, right? The stories don't add up. They never add up. We're being deceived by something more etheric, more subtle. We may even be getting deceived by our own unconscious to keep the dream going. That's why I say UFOs are far stranger than you think. Remote viewing is real. Yeah, I believe it's real. All right, so let's jump to a question. Let's see if there's one on YouTube here. Do you think the Vatican works with these UFOs? Okay, so this is an interesting question. I've thought a lot about since I've been reading Jacque Vallee. Okay, and we'll get the question on TikTok. So, because there was also a time when these UFOs were angels and demons. Here's a really strange detail. Again, but by the time you're done really thinking about everything I'm saying, if you believe something specific about what this was, you can't believe it anymore. You're going to have cognitive dissonance. Back in the day, tell me if this sounds familiar, demons would go over people's beds at night, especially women, and they would insert a piece of metal like a giant needle into the woman's belly. What does that sound like? This is happening hundreds of years ago. It sounds like when the alien abduction thing happens and the gray aliens want to take the embryonic cells and produce hybrids. It's the same thing with a different skin. What we know is that the fundamental act is the idea of a metal object being inserted into your body in that particular area, which causes you terror and pain. That's the consistent motivation, whether it's a demon 500 years ago or a gray alien in the 1950s. Whatever this thing is, it's operating at a more subtle, primal level that it's trying to rewire our circuits through terror and trauma and through different kind of symbolic suggestion. That's true. That's happened tons of times. The one with the demon and the needle. Almost identical once you remove the skin and replace it with the gray alien and you give it a little cover story with the whole embryonic hybrid thing. It's not real. That's just the narrative cover story for what they're trying to do, which is something to do with the needle inserted into your body, pain, afraid. What the heck is this monstrosity in front of me taking something from my body? That's the message they're trying. And then they give you the sub-narrative or the unsubstantial narrative so that you don't realize that's what they're trying to do. You don't realize that the fundamental thing is that underneath. So going back to this idea of the Vatican, going back to the idea of all the esoterics, because there's a decent amount of evidence to suggest that the arcane, the esoteric was involved in a lot of these. But if you can do a good magic trick using technology, smoke and mirrors to influence a community or a society in a way that you want them to be influenced, that you know that they wouldn't do it if you just asked them. But if you made some crazy supernatural thing and then set up a suggestion inside of that, they would do it. And if you were the kind of person that didn't really have any morals, that's what you'd do. You'd perform magic tricks. You jump on to the UFO thing and use it for your religion. So yeah, I think the Vatican works with UFOs, but they don't work with the ships. They don't work with the aliens inside of them. They work with the magic of the actual supernatural ecosystem. That's another thing. I think this is my personal belief, is that there's some institutions that are very aware of what this is. There was a guy in Project Blue Book that he was being interviewed by, forget his name now, but it's in that it's in a newer documentary that Jacque Vallee was loosely involved in. Can't think of the name now, but I'll post it on the Library of Alexandria Spiritual Cinema later on, so it'll be in the links in the link tree. But he essentially, this guy from Blue Book's like, so the interviewer was like, so you guys just seemed to stop Blue Book, like you didn't seem like you could get anywhere. And then the guy from Blue Book said, or maybe we figured out what it was. And then the interviewer started kind of talking about something else, and he says, or maybe we figured out what it was, and we didn't have to have Blue Book anymore. I think there's a lot of folks that know exactly what it is. And I think it's the dream stuff. I think that the reality is not as physical and stable as we think it is, and we can think it into something else. And for instance, a religion takes that force, that energy, that light that flows through, that descends from heaven into Jerusalem and builds the world, which is what they've said for thousands of years. And then they form it and shape it with symbols and rituals and gods. And then they get as many people as they can to pray and worship to it, which empowers them. And they put gold on the ceiling in all of the Vatican's churches because gold is conductive. And it pulls in this energy, which goes into you when you pray to their God. And they collect interest on all of that energy and attention. And so, yeah, so in that way, the Vatican works through UFOs. But it's not direct like the way, we might think it is. Because the UFOs aren't really that real. Besides the ones that, are built at DARPA and Skullworks. Like I said, I think a lot of this is the dream stuff. Okay, so a question from TikTok now. What do you think of? It said, "Hey, from the UK. What do you think about the pyramids and the dimensions of Earth?" Great question, and it really does attach really deeply into to this belief I have. Okay, so I want you guys to do a little thought experiment with me. Okay, I know I didn't get through a lot of questions here, but I hope people got a lot out of it, and I'll try to do these once every couple weeks. Maybe we'll do this one again because there's so much to talk about here, and maybe next time I'll just do a question and answer. I won't. I've talked everything. I've said a lot of what I needed to say. And so we'll do another one of these in a couple of weeks, and we'll just do question and answer, and I'll answer a lot more questions here, okay? The pyramids. Okay, so think about this. Just do a little thought experiment with me. Imagine it's 20 years from now, and we have full photorealistic, perfectly simulated reality. We can put the goggles on, or it's Neuralink, or we drink a potion, whatever it is, and we can go into a simulation completely. And we start out, because we're mapping and we're building the world, we start out in God mode. We got all the cheat codes on. Okay. Now we go in there, and maybe we're doing it for a couple hours a day, but eventually it gets so fun and so addictive and so immersive that we end up just staying in there. They hook us up with a food tube and whatever else we need, to keep us alive, and we go in. And we still have all the cheat codes. And so we're able to, like Minecraft, build blocks, build tons of them, and set them up perfectly, and use like the point and click and make it align perfectly with the map of the world. And we keep doing that, but then we get a little bored. We're like, this is too easy. So let's hide some of the cheat codes in a place in the realm. So when we want to get out of here, we can do that. And if we want to like do the magic again, we can do that. But let's make it more difficult. Let's make it like, let's go on survival mode. So we put some of those things away and we bury it somewhere, but like the generations keep going in the simulation, right? And maybe we forget where we left some of those things. And maybe we forget some more things. And maybe we forget some more things. And those giant structures that they align perfectly with the dimensions of their Earth, which they used to know how to do. They've lost everything in tomes because they couldn't remember where they put all their inventory. And the new generations of people have no idea. And they look at things like pyramids in that reality and wonder how the hell they got there, because they have no idea how those people would have built those things. And then you have to ask yourself if that's what we're dealing with here. And if we've dealt with that 1,000 times. The pyramids elude rational explanation. One, for their purpose, because they weren't tomes. There's an entire like organization of professional Egyptologists whose only job is to censor the truth and blackball people and ban them from going to Giza. That's the truth. There's an entire professional class of Egyptologists that are only there to stop people from figuring out what the hell happened in Egypt. Why? Right? Because people talk about like trying to break in and be a trailblazer in science or philosophy and this, that, and the third. And people will say egos and no one wants to be proven wrong and that. Okay, maybe sometimes for like the animals that end up getting these degrees that are so self-conscious that they stop truth. Right? I think maybe that happens sometimes. But I think it's even weirder than that, way weirder than that. I think that they're being informed. They know exactly what's going on. They know people like Graham Hancock is probably correct. And they don't want anybody to figure it out, because above all, knowledge is power. First off, money, land, okay, sure. Knowledge, the knowledge about how to use money, the knowledge about how to use land and make more money doing it, accrue more power. That knowledge is where it's at. Information, okay? And whatever information, just the same way the government with their hidden technologies. It's information manifested in technology, which gives them extreme power over everything else. That's what this is really about. And so we have a cover-up story happening in Giza. That's continually trying to stop us from understanding what the pyramids actually are, telling us they were giant cemeteries. It's not because they're afraid that their wonderful theory about the pyramid being a tomb for a king who had the ego the size of Giza. It's probably not that. It's probably because they're probably pretty aware of what these things actually were, and they're either being instructed to make sure it doesn't get out, or they themselves don't want it to get out because they like that information. There's good Egyptologists in Giza, okay, but there's a professional class of them that's only censoring, only telling us the BS that nobody in the right mind will believe after they look at everything. But there's some Egyptologists that will tell you the truth. Okay. So there's this one story that one of these guides that knew all about the stories about all that, he went to the top of the pyramid and he showed the researchers that were there. He said, hey, check this out. And he spreads his arms wide on top of the pyramid and everyone's ears start to ring. Right? He knew that was something that the pyramid did. That somehow him almost creating like a circuit caused a sonic disturbance in everyone's ears. And allegedly, one of the researchers got a bottle that he basically rigged like a the Baghdad battery, where you had the cathode in there with the citrus acid and like the copper wire that some people believe was an actual battery. He had something like that in like a glass bottle or something, and he held it up in the space where he thought that this guy was pulling a field, and the bottle lit up. And it even freaked the guy out that it showed him the sound thing. So obviously, and another thing is the pyramids are built right on top of aquifers, and they're made of granite. Now, we could talk about this stuff for hours. So like I said, we're going to do part 2, part 3, part 4. There's so much here. So this is how I'll kind of end it. Maybe I'll hit another question here and there, okay? So the pyramids are built on aquifers, groundwater systems. So like lots of intricate veins of water flowing through the rocks. The pyramids are built with crystal quartz, I think granite, and the granite is laced with the crystal quartz, and limestone. Limestone is an insulator. Crystal quartz is a conductor. All right, by the way, this is how an orgone generator is created. Okay, insulator, conductor, insulator, conductor, insulator, conductor, and layers. And you pull in that orgone energy, which is the same thing I think as chi or Holy Spirit. But what's interesting is that the aquifers conduct electricity, pulls it into the pyramid, and the pyramid continues to stack it to the inner chamber, the middle chamber, where you go in to lay and meditate. It's like instant remote viewing, instant astral projection. That's what the pyramids were for. On one level, I think they were also like capacitors for actual electricity for them. Like I think it served several purposes. Like I think CERN served several purposes. It's not just for smashing subatomic particles together. I think the pyramid was a multifunctional device. Like we have tons of those things. Like we have tons of like buildings that serve 100 purposes. I think the pyramids were the same way. These were the epicenters of these cities, and they provided public good in the form of energy, I think, but they also were sacred spaces. I mean, Napoleon allegedly went inside of the pyramid overnight and and this is something they did back then. Like these leaders, like Alexander the Great, Napoleon, many others. They had their pilgrimage to Egypt. It was a coming of age, coming of being a king, because they knew there was something there that they would do that would transform them completely, and it does. The whole pyramid thing is tied deeply into the mystery schools. It's a device for that, right? And yeah, so coordinating all those things with the dimensions of the earth, one has the purpose of showing the divine mathematics and the wisdom, but probably also turns up the volume on whatever phenomenon they're trying to manifest with it. Same thing, having the knowledge of the groundwater underneath, and knowing that the crystal quartz and the granite and the limestone insulating it would pull electricity up from the running water, because the running water creates a very specific type of electromagnetic radiation. It's said that like cats and dogs won't sleep above running water. They don't like to do that. They'll try to move to another because they can feel the electrical impulse. So what gets really weird is when you go into David Paulides' work. David Paulides of Missing 411, he's wrote books and done documentaries. Many of his cases where the people disappeared, it was like missing persons cases of very high strangeness, right? We won't get into too many details, but we'll discuss that another time. But he would find a lot of these people, like where they went missing and where they might show up, next to running water and granite rock. It was so obvious that he had to include it as a detail. It doesn't seem like it's like, well, yeah, maybe there was a tree there too. No, but it was so prevalent in his cases that he had to say it became one of the things he actually looked for: running water and granite stone. There's something strange that happens with these people. I think I don't know what's happening here. Verify to continue. I'm in the middle of a live. What would I need to verify for? Interesting. There's something very strange with running water and granite rock, which now we talk about the pyramid and all the effects it has, and maybe possibly allowing us to astral project in remote view. And then with David Paulides' work, the strangeness, the highest strangeness about all these people who went missing was that they seemed to disappear into thin air, as if they just entered into another dimension. And so just kind of let that cook a little bit. This idea of the running water and the granite and the pyramids and portals and all. I know this all sounds fantastic, even more fantastic than Jesus Christ coming back to save you or the Galactic Federation. But I do think it's even stranger than we've been led to believe. I think it's even stranger than all our mythological stories. But we're telling these simpler ones so we don't freak ourselves out, because it's way weirder. Well, we've just collapsed reality into something simple and palpable and digestible. What reality actually is super freaky. And we've done everything we can to narrow down our lens for what we're able to see, so that we don't see the invisible elephant in the room. So that's my rant. Okay, that's my TED Talk. I'll grab one or two questions maybe from here, and then TikTok's bugging out on me. It's the CIA's new favorite social media. Let's see. I'm not seeing a question on TikTok. They're not even letting me see the old comments. They did some weird thing where they made me verify while I was on my own TikTok doing a live for an hour. I had to verify that I was not a robot. Whatever. That's TikTok for you. Let's see if we can ask a question here. Sorry, guys. I know you probably asked a ton of questions, but it's not letting me go up to see any of them. Yeah, remember when we thought the cell phones on Star Trek were ridiculous? Exactly. And then boom, then we actually have them. And even more advanced, right? Who am I talking to? I'm on 3 different lives, so I'm kind of jumping around, trying to talk to everyone. I just wanted to give everyone an opportunity, whatever social media they prefer to use. I put the link in the bio anytime I do these, so you can do like the main one where I'm looking. But I like to include anybody who wants to just jump on from another social media to get involved too. Do humans possess frequency manipulation without technology? Absolutely. Like absolutely. It's been proven. The Maharishi effect, like, you know, you can say what you want about the actual effect in the institution, but they did research on this where if you meditated, the square root of 1% of a population, if they meditated on a particular idea like peace, crime rates would drop dramatically. And it was, they kept on testing it, and they showed that the meditation had something to do with it. This is all with manifestation and the placebo effect. This, when we think, when we feel, it emits real frequency. Frequency automatically has to have an effect. The only question becomes, how much of an effect can it have? It's not a question of whether or not our thoughts and our emotions and our actual, just our energy is affecting the physical world in a real way. It's how it's affecting it. And is there any conscious ability, like you're saying, to manipulate change the events. And I think you can on two levels. One, with real impact from your actual essence, your vibrations, the frequencies that you create from your thoughts. But two, this brain is so much more powerful than we can even begin to wrap our heads around, and we're not using much of it. But when we get into deep meditative states, when we get into deep prayer, like states of prayer and belief and faith, we turn on more parts of the brain that can do incredible computations to put us in the right place in the right time to say the right exact thing, to make a thing happen that wouldn't have happened without it, almost essentially performing miracles. You need something to happen in your life, and you have faith that it will happen, that you'll be blessed, whether it's because you believe in God or just the power of prayer in general or whatever it is. When you deeply feel it and start to imagine it, your subconscious mind's like, okay, got it. And it does way more computation than you could even begin to think about or imagine just with your conscious mind. And it might be because it makes you sleep through your alarm and ends up making you late, which makes you take a shortcut to work, but the shortcut ends up leading you to the person that you needed to meet in order to make the thing happen. I think the subconscious is capable of doing that. I think the subconscious does that. That's what all these synchronicities are about. That's just subconscious mind putting you in the situation to get that synchronicity, to remind you, hey, that's the way you're supposed to go to get the thing that you asked me for. Right? The subconscious mind is deeply rooted in this real understanding of what God actually is. It's the key or gate to get to God. And that's why Michelangelo drew that painting, The Creation of Adam, because God's sitting on a cloud that's shaped like a brain and trying to reach Adam, but Adam is like barely trying to reach, and God's outstretched hand, he's like, come on, get connected. It just means get connected with the whole mind. There's way more going on there. Divinity, the understanding of divinity itself lies within this if we actually visit the interior and through rectification retrieve the hidden stone, vitriol and alchemy. Go inside yourself, meditate, turn the whole thing on, and you'll have the philosopher's stone. Right? Hey Neely, how you doing? Long time no see. Hope everything's good. Do you think interdimensional portals are real, and where do you think they lead to? It's a good question. I was talking about this the other day with somebody, and we were like, okay, so we have this Hollywood idea of what a portal is, right? It's like a Stargate, you know, and it's this big blue thing that's swirling, and you jump in, you go to another place or time. But like, and we have these anecdotal stories and these mythological and historical, like the Hopi talk about there being portals in the Navajo, saying that there's certain doors. Sometimes they were actually little door-shaped things they carved out of the mountains. But I think what's actually happening with those is that, again, it would make more sense if the whole reality was being created by thought, and therefore the portal would manifest itself in whatever way it's not, it doesn't have real mechanics. The only mechanics are that you walk through that and then you're brought to another set of zeros and ones. You feel me? It's not that the portal actually has to warp space, time, and that. It just has to convince you that it did it. I think that would make more sense. I think the reason portals exist is because we believe they exist. And they'll become more reality the more people believe in them. It's like there was a scientist, I forget his name now, German guy, came after Einstein, and he proposed a theory that sort of it like was coming against a little bit of what Einstein was saying, but also adding more onto it. But when Einstein was doing his theory, there was no evidence that this thing existed. And then this guy started talking about it, and then things started changing in the environment to fit what he was saying. And I think this is largely what happens. I think we propose ideas that make enough sense that we believe them, and then it recreates reality to fit the belief we have in it. And I think it's like that's like the good version of whatever's messing with us on the other side. It's like we can think it's all sand that we can build into castles or volcanoes, right? And when we're on track and we realize that this reality is a dream world that we can dream up anything, things go really good. But then there's these other external forces or maybe internal forces that run counter to that and try to make it a nightmare. And I think that's the real struggle of good and evil, is whatever force is trying to agitate us. Entropy. It's like, look, the devil and entropy are the same thing. The devil conceptually and entropy as a force in our reality have the exact same qualities. The devil is entropy. And that's why, like, the it's not, is it Baphomet? It's a pagan deity that's representative of the aggravating force of nature. That's entropy. It's all tied up together. So whatever this thing is, yeah, it's the devil. But you have to ask yourself, like, beyond these narratives of good and evil, like, it's not like it's ultimately evil necessarily. Maybe it's just feels evil because it's scary. But maybe scary is what makes us courageous, for instance. And maybe if we didn't have these two forces rubbing up against each other, there'd be no process and reality couldn't exist without this sort of struggle between Agramon and Ahura Mazda, right? The force of light and the force of darkness. What I've concluded means the force of expansion and the force of collapse. The force of expansion and collapse working together, let's say at the subatomic and atomic level, is what manifests accretion. And without accretion, reality can't exist. Accretion is essentially like when particles start to, like, get attracted to each other and then they hit each other and it creates a spin, right? And that's where you get galaxies and solar systems and all this other stuff. But it's the force of it pulling, but also wanting to be away from it at the same time. This expansion and collapse, which creates the actual twist, spin on space-time, which allows reality to exist. And so I think, like, these sort of agitating forces will always be with us. But I think it's also important for us to continue pursuing to understand them so that we can transcend and rise above the current insane predicament that we're in, where everything's collapsing. What's concerning about the collapse of everything, our belief systems, our philosophy, our governments, our economy, is not that they're collapsing. What's concerning is what can rise up afterwards. Because it's really one of two things, right? An absolute dystopia that we'll have a very hard time climbing out of, or something incredible, where we dispose of all the old that's not working anymore and create something that makes sense for everybody. And try and find a way to balance the forces of good and evil. Right? Like, look, back in the day when we were nomads, you know who ran the physical militaristic defense aspect of the tribe? It was the person that had the most psychopathic characteristics, because you need a person that has slight psychopathy, they'll say slight, to make the hard decisions, like when you have to defend your entire tribe from warring barbarians. You have to be able to execute literally without thinking about it and feeling emotion. So there's this balance here, right? What the issue is that we're imbalanced. We have complete psychopaths who don't care about anything but themselves running the world. What we need is a person who can stomach making hard decisions that are valuable to the community. It's something in the middle. You understand what I'm saying? So that's sort of tangential, but the point I'm making is there's obviously these subversive forces in our reality, whether we're dealing with propaganda, we're dealing with corrupt politicians, this UFO deception stuff. And sometimes this can inspire us to build a better world. But right now, it seems to be creating a sort of stagnation, where we're all fighting with each other and everyone's confused and everyone's making up a new belief system, to try to grapple with the strangeness and the nonsensicalness of reality, whether it's through the culture, through the internet, or even just through getting up in the morning and thinking, what the hell's happening? But it's created this sort of stagnation where I feel like we're all standing in one place, spinning in circles. We need to find a way to parlay with these forces that are, wanting to block out the sun with particles of metal, or or make everyone eat bug powder. All these lunatics who have taken it to this extreme, and we're not even sure why, if they're even sincere about caring about the environment, or if they just enjoy suffering. We have no idea. But we have to find a way to intelligently parlay with them. But the first thing we have to do is get some teeth, right? Like Jordan Peterson says about like coming in contact with your monster and becoming truly meek, which means to carry a great sword and to have the wisdom to know when to use it. There's got to be this balance here where we're able to courageously experiment with ideas, for instance. Go beyond the idea that, Jesus takes care of everything and I don't have to do anything. Beyond the idea that the Galactic Federation has a couple more loose ends to tie up before they swoop down and save us. We have to have the courage to get out there, and realize that maybe we're the trailblazers. Maybe we're the ones that have to save the world. I always go back to this, but this is the truth. We're caught up in all of these stories that promise us that everything's already taken care of, and we just have to sit along for the ride. I mean, it's even in the Kali Yuga nonsense. I know that's even more blasphemy than talking about Jesus Christ not coming back. They talk about everything being in cycles. That's an easy way to get people to not do anything. Of like, oh, it's just part of the process. This is the time of destruction. You just have to let it flow. How about fuck you? How about we don't have to destroy ourselves? How about we can learn from our mistakes before they end us? I think all these narratives are meant to trap us. And I think they've been being told for thousands of years by whoever this spooky Agent Smith character is. Almost like they got us in a coma. They're trying to keep us in this dream by continually making it weird and strange and entertaining and putting us on a new path here and there. We have to get a little more witty and more cunning. We have to treat our reality, both individually, like whatever we're experiencing, but also communally, as a detective story. There's a mystery to be solved here. And the UFO, UAP, Bigfoot, supernatural is at the heart of it on one level. And the fact that, for instance, quantum physics has come to an extreme screeching halt. Because what comes after quantum physics, vortex physics, the morphogenetic field theory, and hopefully in the future, if I'm right, the dream field theory, they don't want to talk to you about those things. Because if they start talking about those things, they start talking to you about the fabric of this reality, the real fabric of this reality. And if everyone has that information, everyone has the power. And there's some volatility there that I think they're worried about, but it's also the fact that they like being in control. We need full disclosure, not disclosure that aliens have been visiting us, full disclosure of what the phenomenon actually is, if that makes sense. All right, so that'll end it for the night. Thank you all for being here. This is being recorded, so it'll be on YouTube, and I'll put the link somewhere where it's easy to get to. And like I said, I really like this stuff, and I think next time we'll just do question and answer, and I'll stay with the questions, and I'll go around so I can keep track and not lose, because I'm sure there's a lot of questions that were asked here that were great that I didn't get to. But I'd like to get to them next time. So let's put it for a soft date of 2 weeks from now. So not this Friday, but the Friday after that. And we'll just do a question and answer unless you guys want me to talk, but we'll make sure we get through all those questions. So thanks for being here. As always, thanks for all the support you guys give, right? Wouldn't be able to do this if people didn't show up and care what I had to say. So it means a lot, always does. And we're growing every day. TikTok's got 440,000 followers. YouTube's up over 1,000 now. Instagram's at 2Gs. X is at 500. So it's really cool to grow this. It's not what it's about. Like I don't count the followers for the, oh, I got this, but you know, it's nice to be able to get the message out to more people. I'm not trying to convince you to believe in anything. I'm just trying to convince you to think really hard and be really critical and shrewd, so that no one can pull wool over your eyes. I think that's the most important point. Is I'd like to help to inspire people to be critical thinkers, think for themselves, and keep that open mind and that open heart, so that we can solve these problems, right? Because there'll always be problems. There'll always be things we need to solve. Well, let them be fun things. Let them be interesting things. Like, how are we going to rebuild the pyramids and make them work again? That should be the problems we're dealing with, not with how do we cope with the fact that our leaders are not real people. They're like actors. That's terrifying. I don't know what's going on exactly, but I don't think the problem is unfixable, but it requires all of our effort together to get it done, right? All right, folks, much love to all of you. Thank you so much for everything. As always, I'm very grateful for all of you, really, honestly. I'm just talking. All I ever do is talk shit. I just hope that some of it makes sense and helps you to, inspires you to make waves in other people's lives. Just questioning things that don't make sense, calling out bad behavior in yourself and others, you know. All right, I'll stop rambling. You guys have a wonderful night. God bless.